All right, diving in again with another deep dive. This time, you've given us, well, some pretty interesting source material to work with.
Well,
Excerpts from, get this, an academic commentary on the book of Leviticus.
oh, wow. Okay. So we're tackling ancient Israelite law and rituals.
That's right. And get this, we're going to find some surprisingly relevant insights into things like daily life, purity, and even social justice.
You know, it really is fascinating when you think about it.
Yep.
All these laws that people often see as, I don't know, like archaic or irrelevant, they're really a window into a whole civilization's values and beliefs.
Exactly. It's like a blueprint for how they saw their relationship with God.
And each other.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that really jumps out at you in Leviticus is this huge focus on offerings and rituals.
Absolutely. And the commentary really stresses this point. They weren't just empty gestures, you know. These rituals, they had all these really specific procedures and layers of symbolism.
Right.
And they were really central to how the Israelites understood things like atonement and maintaining a good relationship with God.
So, okay, let's break down these offerings a bit.
Okay.
We've got burnt offerings, grain offerings, peace offerings, all with their own unique purpose.
Right.
What made each offering distinct?
Well, think of it this way. Each one reflects a different side of the human experience, like the burnt offering. That was all about complete surrender and devotion to God.
I see.
The rising smoke, it symbolized a gift going up to heaven.
It's really interesting how they incorporated these really physical elements like fire and smoke.
Oh, absolutely. And then you've got the grain offering, which represented, you know, the fruits of their labor,
Okay.
a tangible way of expressing gratitude for God's provision.
Like saying, hey, thanks for the blessings. Here's a little bit of what we were able to produce.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Then there's the peace offering, and this one was all about communion, like sharing a meal with God and with each other, strengthening the community, fellowship.
So it wasn't just about, like, appeasing a deity. These offerings were really woven into their social and community life.
I'd say so, yeah. Reinforcing their connection to the divine and to each other.
Then we come to the sin and guilt offerings. Those feel a bit heavier, I guess.
Yeah, a bit more serious, right? These deal with the very human reality of messing up, of making mistakes.
And we all do that.
Oh, for sure. The commentary really emphasizes this idea that the need for atonement, for seeking forgiveness and kind of restoring balance, it was deeply ingrained in their whole worldview.
Well, yeah, makes sense.
So how did these offerings address that? Well, the rituals involved things like sprinkling or splashing sacrificial blood, and it was about symbolically transferring the impurity onto the offering.
It's interesting. The commentary really highlights that distinction between sprinkle and splash.
Right.
It seems like even the tiniest little details had meaning.
Oh, absolutely. The specific words, the direction of the sprinkling, all of it added layers of meaning. It wasn't just about going through the motions. It was about doing these actions with, like, intention and understanding.
It's like a carefully choreographed dance.
Yeah.
Where every step, every gesture means something.
That's a great way to put it.
And speaking of choreography, we can't forget the priests. Their role seems pretty central to all of this.
Oh, essential. The commentary describes them as the mediators between the people and God, responsible for making sure all these sacred rituals were carried out correctly.
Talk about responsibility. Leviticus goes into all this detail about their clothing, their behavior, even restrictions on who they could marry. It's like, you know, a strict dress code and employee handbook combined.
Well, think about it. Their actions had huge spiritual implications for the whole community.
Right.
Remember, we're talking about a time when people really believed that if you messed up these rituals, it could have some pretty serious consequences.
Yeah, no pressure there.
Right.
There's also that fascinating bit about the high priest's breastpiece.
Yeah.
The one with the Urim and Thummim? Sounds kind of like something straight out of a fantasy novel.
It does, doesn't it? The commentary says they were these mysterious objects used for divine communication, but even they admit the exact function is still debated.
Really?
It's like one of those big enigmas of the ancient world.
I'm picturing like a magic 8-ball, but maybe a bit more sophisticated.
Haha, perhaps. But the important thing is that it points to this deep desire to seek guidance and clarity from God,
To connect, yeah.
using whatever means they had.
So we've got offerings, we've got priests, and then there's this whole concept of clean and unclean
Right.
that seems to be everywhere in Leviticus.
Everywhere.
So what was that about? It wasn't just about hygiene, right?
No. It was about categories, boundaries, defining what was considered appropriate or acceptable to God.
Okay.
And as the commentary explains, this applied to everything: animals, bodily discharges, even objects.
Some of those examples are pretty vivid.
Yeah.
Camels, rock badgers, and pigs. Not kosher.
Definitely off the menu. But cows, sheep, goats, those were fine.
So it seems like they were trying to define what a holy life looked like, down to the smallest details.
I could say so, yeah.
What they ate, how they interacted with the world around them.
Absolutely. And that quest for holiness, it didn't stop at the temple doors.
Meaning,
Leviticus has a lot to say about social justice and everyday life. And that's where it gets really interesting, don't you think?
absolutely. It's one thing to have rituals and restrictions, but it's another to actually apply those principles to how you treat others.
Right.
What really stands out to you in that area?
Well, there are all these laws related to gleaning.
Gleaning.
Yeah, leaving leftover crops for the poor and for foreigners.
Oh, I see.
Imagine that, having a system built in to ensure everyone had access to food.
Like a built-in safety net. Wow.
And there are rules about honesty in business, fair treatment of laborers, and even condemning practices like divination and tattooing.
Okay, that's interesting.
I know, right?
Hey.
Why those specific prohibitions? Well, the commentaries suggest it was probably tied to the cultural context of the time,
Okay.
trying to distance themselves from the practices of surrounding cultures, practices that were maybe seen as idolatrous or morally corrupt.
Like they were defining their own identity by, setting themselves apart from their neighbors.
Exactly. It's a reminder that these laws were really shaped by their historical and social circumstances. And, connecting that to today,
Yeah.
it raises a big question. How do our own social and cultural norms influence the laws and ethical frameworks we create now?
It's a really good point. We often think of these ancient laws as totally irrelevant, but maybe there's more we can learn from them than we realize.
I think so. Studying these texts, it can help us understand how human morality has evolved.
Yep.
The questions about justice and righteousness that have been with us for centuries.
And Leviticus definitely doesn't shy away from those big questions, that's for sure.
Not at all.
And it doesn't shy away from laying out the consequences of breaking these laws either.
No.
We see some serious punishments mentioned, including this really cryptic one, the cutoff penalty.
Oh, yeah.
So what was that all about? What do we make of that?
Honestly, the commentary leaves that pretty open to interpretation.
Really?
Execution, excommunication, something else entirely. It's fascinating how the text kind of leaves that space for us to ponder.
It definitely adds a layer of mystery.
For sure.
But no matter the crime, it seems like there's always the possibility of atonement, right?
Yes, that's a central theme in Leviticus. The Day of Atonement rituals, they're described in such detail.
Yeah.
And they were all about seeking forgiveness, restoring your relationship with God. This idea that even when we mess up, there's a way back, a way to make things right.
I like that.
And at the heart of it is this complex concept of blood atonement.
Right, where the blood was seen as this way to cleanse, to purify.
Right. And the commentary really gets into the cultural significance of this idea and how its interpretation has evolved over time.
Which brings us to another interesting point. How these ancient laws are still being debated and reinterpreted today.
You're right. It's amazing. It really speaks to the enduring power of these texts.
Their ability to spark conversation.
Reflection, debate.
Across millennia.
Exactly. And speaking of sparking conversation,
Yeah.
there's another whole side to Leviticus that we haven't even touched on yet, the festivals.
Oh, right. From Passover to the festival booths, there's a whole calendar of celebrations.
And they were a big part of their cultural and religious life. I'm guessing these weren't just about having fun, though.
What do you think?
You guessed right. These festivals were deeply intertwined with the agricultural cycle,
I see.
marking key moments like harvest and planting. They were also a way to reinforce a sense of communal identity,
Right.
celebrating their shared history and their covenant with God.
In the commentary, wow, it really dives into the details.
It does.
The way of offering sheaf, the blowing of horns, building temporary shelters. It's like reading a how-to guide for ancient Israelite parties.
I love that. And what's interesting here is how those festivals brought together the practical parts of life with religious observance.
Right.
It wasn't about separating the sacred from the everyday, but rather weaving them together.
It's a really beautiful concept,
It is.
having that sense of the sacred in every part of life.
Exactly.
And of course, we can't forget about the Sabbath.
Ah, yes, the ultimate day of rest.
But I'm guessing it was more than just taking a break from work.
Oh, absolutely. The Sabbath, as described in Leviticus, was about recognizing God's sovereignty over creation,
Right.
honoring this rhythm of rest that's built into the world itself.
I find it amazing how they extended that concept of rest to the land itself.
Yeah,
Every seventh year was a sabbatical year for the land,
right.
and every 50th year, a jubilee year.
Yeah.
Debts forgiven, land returned to its original owners.
Those Jubilee laws are really something, aren't they?
Yeah,
They point to this deep concern for social and economic balance.
making sure everyone had a chance to thrive, that wealth didn't get too concentrated.
Exactly, almost like a reset button for society.
A chance to start fresh, address any imbalances that had crept in,
I love that.
and it's a concept that feels incredibly relevant today.
How so?
Well, as we grapple with things like wealth inequality and economic injustice,
Right.
these ancient laws really offer us some, I don't know, food for thought.
You know, it's true. It makes you wonder, what would a modern-day Jubilee even look like?
I know, right? What impact could it have? So many questions.
And every time we peel back another layer of Leviticus, we find something else to ponder.
From the rituals to the social justice laws, it's a text that keeps challenging us, even thousands of years later.
And inspiring us.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive so far. Offerings, priests, purity laws, social justice, punishments, atonement, festivals, even the Sabbath.
It's a lot, but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, I agree.
There's so much more to uncover.
Layers upon layers of meaning in these texts.
And different interpretations.
It's what makes exploring them so fascinating.
Exactly. It's not about finding the right answer. It's about engaging with the ideas, wrestling with the complexities, and seeing how these ancient wisdom traditions might still speak to us today.
I think that's a perfect place to pause for now.
Okay.
We've given our listener a lot to think about. We'll be back in just a moment to continue our deep dive into Leviticus.
And as we keep exploring Leviticus, there's this one theme that really sticks out to me.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
It's this whole concept of holiness.
Holiness. See, when I think of Leviticus, that's not the first thing that comes to mind.
I get that.
I think of all the rules, the restrictions,
Yeah.
maybe even a little bit of harshness.
Yeah, I can see that. But the commentary, it makes this really interesting argument. It says, all those rules and restrictions, they weren't arbitrary.
Okay.
They were pointing to a deeper idea of holiness.
Okay.
Holiness not just as a set of external behaviors, but
Uh.
like a way of life.
I'm listening. Unpack that for me.
What did holiness actually look like in the world of Leviticus? Well, it was about recognizing the sacredness of everything,
Okay.
from the rituals in the temple to how you treated people in your everyday life.
So it wasn't just about being pure in this ritualistic way,
Right.
but also about how you lived ethically and justly.
Exactly. And the commentary, it makes this connection between the purity laws and the social justice laws,
Oh, interesting.
arguing that they're both expressions of the same underlying principle.
What, like creating a community that reflects God's holiness?
Exactly. It's like saying, if you're going to be set apart, you got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Makes sense.
Holiness wasn't just about avoiding certain foods or doing certain rituals. It was about cultivating a certain way of being in the world, a way that honored God and, uplifted other people.
That's a pretty high standard. Makes me think about how we even define holiness today. Do you think those old concepts still have any relevance for us?
Absolutely. I mean, sure, the specific expressions of holiness, those might look different in different cultures and different times.
Right.
But the underlying principles, they're still incredibly relevant. Living with intention, recognizing how interconnected everything is, striving for justice and compassion. These are values that I think go beyond any one religion.
So maybe instead of getting stuck on the specifics, the do's and don'ts,
Yeah.
we can look to Leviticus as more of a guide for how to live a life with more purpose, more meaning.
I love that. It's about asking ourselves, how can we live in a way that reflects our deepest values? How can we make the world more just, more compassionate, more aligned with our understanding of what it means to be good?
Big questions, for sure, but inspiring ones, too.
Definitely.
And, as we talk about these big ideas, I keep thinking about the actual people,
The Israelites.
Yeah, all these laws and rituals, they must have shaped their lives in such profound ways.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine living in a world where every single part of your life, what you eat, how you do business, all of it, is guided by these divine instructions.
It'd be a totally different way of experiencing the world. I wonder how they reconcile those instructions with their own human desires and ambitions?
That's the question, isn't it? And while we can't get inside their heads, we can look for clues in the text itself.
Well, one thing's for sure, the text definitely acknowledges that humans make mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
We see it in the sin offerings, the guilt offerings, the punishments. It's pretty clear they weren't naive about our capacity for wrongdoing.
You're right. But alongside those acknowledgments of human weakness,
Yeah.
there's also this unwavering belief in redemption, in the possibility of starting over.
Okay.
Like the Day of Atonement rituals, it was all about cleansing, renewal, wiping the slate clean.
A fresh start.
Exactly. This powerful concept that no matter how far we go astray, there's a way back.
And that path, according to Leviticus, involved more than just individual repentance.
Right. You got it. It also involved communal action. Think of the Jubilee year. It wasn't just about individuals forgiving debts.
Right.
It was about the whole society taking steps to fix systemic injustices and make sure resources were more fairly distributed.
It's amazing how they baked these mechanisms for, like, course correction right into their legal system.
Right. It shows you how they understood that true holiness wasn't just about personal piety, it was about social responsibility.
It wasn't enough to just be ritually pure. They also had to work towards a just and compassionate society.
Exactly. And that message, it really resonates. It's a reminder that faith without action, it's incomplete.
Couldn't agree more.
As we go deeper into Leviticus, we see that interplay of personal and communal responsibility pop up in all sorts of ways.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, think about the laws about how to treat animals.
Okay.
It wasn't just about preventing cruelty, it was about respecting life itself, recognizing that everything is connected.
That's a perspective we don't hear enough these days.
Definitely worth considering, especially in a world facing things like climate change and environmental damage.
Maybe there's some real wisdom to be found in those old teachings.
About living in harmony with the natural world.
Makes you wonder what other hidden gems are tucked away in these ancient texts.
Doesn't it? That's the beauty of engaging with these works. They offer this timeless perspective on human nature, our relationship with the divine, and the challenges of building a good society.
I feel like we've only just begun to explore what Leviticus has to offer. What other insights have you gleaned from this deep dive?
What really stands out to me is this constant emphasis on intentionality. Whether it was the rituals or the social justice laws, it's clear they approached life with a deep sense of purpose, of meaning.
Wasn't just going through the motions.
Not at all. It was about living with awareness, making choices that aligned with their values, and trying to create a world that reflected their understanding of, the divine.
Powerful stuff. Makes me wonder, what would it look like for us to live with that same level of intentionality today?
That's a question I've been asking myself too. And I don't know that there's one answer,
Right.
but I think it starts with some basic questions, What do we really value? What kind of world do we want? And how can our actions, even the small ones, contribute to that vision?
Not easy questions.
No.
But I have a feeling that wrestling with them, even if we don't find all the answers, can lead us to a more meaningful life.
I agree. And, as we wrap up this deep dive into Leviticus,
Yeah.
it struck me that this text, which so many people see as dry and legalistic, actually offers this really rich and nuanced view of what it means to live a good life.
It's a reminder that even in the most unexpected places, we can find wisdom and guidance for dealing with the complexity of, well, just being human.
Exactly. That's the beauty of these enduring works. They make us question our assumptions, broaden our perspectives, and help us see the world and ourselves in new ways.
I think that's a great place to pause for now. We've covered a lot, and I'm sure our listener has plenty to think about. We'll be back in a moment to finish up our deep dive into this fascinating world of Leviticus. Welcome back. This deep dive has really been something else.
It has, hasn't it? Who knew Leviticus could be so, so thought-provoking?
Seriously. I mean, we've uncovered so much, from ancient rituals to surprisingly progressive social justice laws.
Oh, for sure.
And that idea of holiness, not just rules, but a way of life.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Are we just going through the motions, or are we actually trying to make the world a better place, a place that reflects our values?
As we've been talking, I can't stop thinking about that Jubilee year idea.
No, the debt forgiveness and societal reset.
Yeah, it's so radical, almost impossible to imagine in today's world.
I know what you mean.
But there's something about it that
So it's compelling.
yeah, it's like it reminds us that things don't have to be this way, We can create a more just world.
Even if it's hard.
Exactly, even if it seems impossible.
And maybe Leviticus, with its emphasis on community and caring for the vulnerable, can guide us.
I think so. It's not just about being a good person. It's about working together to create a world where everyone has a chance.
That's it, exactly. And that responsibility, it goes beyond just us. Think about the laws about animals, about the
It's
land.
like they understood that everything is connected,
They did.
that our actions, they affect everything, not just ourselves.
And that message, it's even more important now, don't you think? With climate change, environmental damage, we really need to remember that interconnectedness.
So Leviticus,
Mm.
a blueprint for an ancient society,
Yeah.
but also maybe inspiration for a better future.
I think so, yeah. It reminds us that even in these old texts, we can find wisdom that speaks to us today.
We've given you a lot to think about. What will you take away from this deep dive?
For me, it's realizing that holiness isn't some abstract concept. It's something we can all strive for.
Mhm.
Living intentionally, being kind, recognizing the sacredness of everything.
Well said. And for everyone listening, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore in Leviticus. Different interpretations, its impact on religious and ethical thought, all of it. Keep learning, keep questioning. And who knows, maybe Leviticus will change the way you see the world.